Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Scottish Property Podcast. My name is Stephen Clark and I'm joined as always with my co-host Nick Ponte. How are you, Nick?
All good, thank you very much.
So today we have a fantastic couple of guests. We've got a bonus one. We've got a couple of podcast virgins today. We've invited Eddie from Invertay Homes based in Dundee, and he brought his business partner Mike along, which was great to have both of them on the podcast. These guys started building new build homes. Now, I followed them on Instagram for probably about a couple of years, and when people kind of ping up and they're not full of shit, they're actually doing the do, they're not trying to sell you something, they're not trying to market something, he's just showing you what his business was doing. And I was always wanted to chat with him, always wanted to meet him. He was actually a guest on the Dundee Scottish Property Podcast networking event a couple of months back, and obviously because we were hosting our events, we missed out on it. So luckily he joined us in the podcast. They started off with a bang, didn't they? Their very first sites, building 30 homes. They didn't start off small, did they?
Unbelievable story when you think about it, and it just shows you what can be done in a short space of time. If you take into account 2 years of those 6 or 7 years we're going through a global pandemic, and they've now got to a point where I think Invertay Homes, they've built about 106 houses, I think. Some of them being big kind of grand design type stuff as well. So it was really interesting. I think their kind of key sort of mission statement was to build affordable, sustainable housing, because they realised that there was a real issue, and homes were getting built that weren't meeting young families' needs and stuff like that. So they go into a lot of that, how they don't just, not everything's just done on the bottom line and to make the maximum profit. They go into, like Eddie was talking about taps, how they pay that bit extra to get decent quality stuff at the start, and that's where they're kind of like the morals and their ethics lie, which was really interesting as well.
Yeah, it was nice to see that, because this is probably one of the first interviews we've had with a new build developer or a small housing developer. And it was good to kind of see that from that point of view. This is not a cookie cutter approach to building homes. These guys are trying to kind of think of it from the buyer's point of view and provide that great product that they can pass on, and it can be utilised as, like you say, as a sustainable family home. So without further ado, let's cut to the interview with Eddie and Mike from Invertay Homes. So welcome to the Scottish Property Podcast, Eddie and Mike from Invertay Homes. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
So guys, you guys are a couple of podcast virgins, so we're quite honoured that you guys have decided to come on the Scottish Property Podcast. So hi, thanks very much for joining us. You guys have got I've followed Eddie on LinkedIn for probably a number of years and seen these cracking new build developments getting done, and sharing that journey, and it's been, I've always wanted to kind of get you on and have a chat with you, so it's good that you're finally on. But can you both kind of take a little bit of time to tell the listeners like a bit about your background before you started Invertay Homes then, effectively?
Sure. I was actually in the country in 2007, working with Scottish Water as a design and project manager. And through the armed forces that Eddie and I met, we thought we could maybe do something better in terms of the way houses were constructed, particularly at the sort of affordable end of the private sector, mainly because at the time I was looking for a new house. I come from an engineering background, so I've been doing a lot of work for Scottish Water on the project management and design of new water and wastewater treatment plants. So absolutely nothing to do whatsoever with new build residential homes. But from that project management experience and the sort of ideas on what things I wanted, I think Eddie and I sort of struck it off in terms of what we needed and what we wanted to see with new build houses that wasn't being delivered at that particular time by new build housing developers. And I guess that started us on a journey of, not quite world aspiration, domination or anything like that, but we certainly had an idea of how we could better improve what was being offered by new build developers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my background was I've been now 30 odd years in construction. Having first started out in the commercial office in 2 years doing some major projects, fitting out banks as in head offices in banks, and companies like Standard Life and Bank Scotland, RBS, fitting out schools, etc. And lots of big main contracting type projects. The issue with that, just like many other small construction companies, is it's not the ideal world to be involved in if you're quite a small company working under a main contractor. It's quite an aggressive industry to be involved in. So in the early 2000s, I moved over into to new build house construction. The first house that I ever built was 630 square metres, a big grand designs, all singing, all dancing house that, luckily a year or so later ended up on the front page of one of the Sunday newspaper magazines. So off the back of that, managed to land a few grand design type houses and did that for quite a few years as well. The issue with those is, if you ever watch grand designs, is the people always run out of money, and being the poor contractor at the bottom of the food chain, still having the same issues where you weren't really in control of your own destiny. As Mike said, we met many years ago, and while we were doing a bit of travelling to various places to go and have a bit of adventure, we talked about housing, the problem with housing, the fact that houses are getting smaller, that the quality is getting poorer, they're becoming less affordable, the costs are going through the roof, etc. And I think after many discussions, probably over a period of a year and a half, we decided that, well, the only way to put that right is to go and deal with it ourselves. So we joined forces back in 2013 officially. We formed Invertay Homes. We identified some land that we wanted to buy for 30 houses, and it took us about 2 years to get that project off the ground. So by the time we got our planning consent, road construction consent, all our statutory approvals on the technical side, utility companies lined up, etc. So it was September 2015 when we first broke ground on our first development with Invertay Homes.
So you guys are unlike probably any other guests we've had on, that most people we have on either go through buying flipping houses, like single houses, or the build up a buy-let portfolio. You guys have just jumped not only into a new build development, but freaking 30 houses for the first new build development.
I blame alcohol a lot on that, to be honest. A lot of whiskey has cost me a lot of money.
Decision making over a few beers is quite dangerous.
But no, I think what's remarkable about it in hindsight is that this was coming off the back of the 2008-2009 global financial crisis, and even at the best of times, banks aren't always the most adventurous when it comes to development loans, but that certainly tightened things up quite a bit coming into sort of 2009, 2010. So the particular time that we chose to get involved in it, lending criteria is still pretty tight. We didn't have a track record. It took quite a lot of convincing, I think, in the early stages to convince people that we weren't completely daft or mad, that we did actually have a plan, and that there was actually a business plan and commercially viable business at the back end of it. Because when you tell people that you're wanting to build bigger houses that have got a better specification and are cheaper than everyone else is building on the market, it doesn't sound like a recipe for success. But that's exactly what we've done. We've stuck to what our original mission statement was, which was building sustainable, affordable homes that are efficient for people, families to live in, that they can genuinely afford, not just from buying one or getting a mortgage, but also to actually able to afford to run it. And I think that's probably one of the legacies that we'll probably have with all the developments, is that they are genuinely affordable compared to what else was on the market at the time.
Which is, I suppose, is quite an important thing right now with the rise in energy prices. Do you guys try and aim for like an EPC rating of like A, or is it like
we're an A standard now on all our houses?
Brilliant.
Yeah, so it's from a space point of view. I mean, when we first looked at our first development, we were quite keen to adopt an approach that was different from every other house builder. We don't run our business like a house builder, and we certainly don't look at developing our houses like any other house builder. So part of that was about how we can just push the boundaries on space, affordability, the energy efficiency of the homes, etc.
But I think the other thing that's quite important differentiator is that we're looking at it through the lens of the house buyer rather than potentially the commercial manager of the business. I think that's important because it's very easy sometimes to tick boxes in terms of achieving a certain rating on energy performance certificates and what have you. But right from the early days, we were bashing the architect over the head in terms of being able to get something that was easily affordable to construct, but also usable living space. It wasn't just about making pretty pictures that might win some architectural awards. It was about how do you make that house genuinely affordable to build, to operate, and to make the best use of limited space. And I think we mentioned before that I was in the market for a house when we first teamed up, and I think that ethos has never left us, is that we always put ourselves in the shoes of someone buying the house. If you're a young family, you want nice big living spaces, you want open plan living, you want a big garden at the back that kids can play in regardless of whether we've got lockdowns or not. So, I think that's been a very important part of our success, is that we're delivering something that people actually want.
But we felt it was important that a family did buy and want to live in one of our houses, that there genuinely was enough space, for example, to have a dining table that, when you get home at the end of the day, or the kids get home from school, that everyone could get around the dining table and sit and have a proper meal together. That's quite an important part of being a family. Whereas, nowadays people are forced into buying a house that's much smaller than what they would ideally like, or what really suits their family, because it's all that they can afford, or it's all that they can save up the deposit for. So, part of our process was, looking at the whole development as a business and saying, well, if you're a developer, we have to make a margin. There's a magic number that we want to make on each and every house, of course. So we started that whole pricing structure as a developer, buying the land, the cost of the materials, etc., and worked that from the ground up to give us a number. And then what we did, as Mike said, we looked at that through the lenses of a house buyer and said, pack all of that to one side. If we are the average family based on the average income, taking that information from the statistics and the demographics that are published by local authorities, if we wanted the widest net possible to make the house available, what realistic value can they afford of a mortgage? And we started with that figure and worked backwards to see what kind of number that would spit out. And that gave us, I guess, quite a narrow window where there was only a little bit of fine tuning to then do on our side to get the numbers to work. And that just involved a bit of intelligence thrown at the design. And as Mike says, it's very easy for an architect to design a house. But if that architect has spent a lifetime designing houses but has never ever built a house, then they're not going to understand the full process from start to finish and all the different elements that bring that together. Whereas we do. So we were able to apply that experience and that knowledge into the design, iron out some of the little things that were quite costly to put in place, but whilst maintaining the overall size of the house. And it's like we have quite a lot of conversations with people about the cost of building a house and how developments are genuinely put together. And if you do it the lazy way, you apply a cost per square meter or a cost per square foot, and you base everything on averages. But that's not the most efficient, and it's not the full picture. Whereas if you break it down into the exact costs of absolutely everything of building a house, from the box of screws that needs to be bought through to the roof tiles, the concrete, the roads, the infrastructure, and price up and genuinely cost every single item individually, you get a really accurate picture of all the I guess the costly items and the things that can add value to that development. And that's how we managed to come up with the way in which we can build our houses a bit bigger than everyone else, but we probably spend a little bit less than everyone else in being able to achieve that.
I think one of the key things that comes out of that analysis is how much time is worth here. Time is the big thing when you're doing housing development. You can share a couple of weeks.
Sorry, Mike, can you bring yourself a bit closer to the laptop? I couldn't hear that bit.
You don't want to see me that much. No, what I was saying is that I think one of the most fundamental things from doing that analysis from a first principles point of view is that you realise how much or how valuable time is, mainly from the point of view of shaving a couple of weeks off the timescales for building a house. not just from a development finance point of view, because every pound's a prisoner there, but also from the point of view of, site management costs, admin and overheads and all the rest of it. And, when we talked earlier about, the narrow window that we have for most people to afford a house, adding a couple of grand onto the house price might be the make or break for them getting a mortgage approval. And so that's why we've always said that you don't just keep tacking it on to the price. You find different ways of achieving the same or better without it costing you more. And let's face it, the last couple of years has been pretty traumatic for the construction industry as a whole in terms of huge cost shocks, labour shortages, delays because of lockdowns and interrupted supply chains. It's been just, the perfect storm of everything, hasn't it? And go ahead.
Sorry, want to come on to that, obviously, because I want to hear how you guys weathered that kind of pandemic. But see, first of all, just going back to that kind of first site, the 30 homes and that, you said you acquired that in 2013. Then I don't know if you said, did you say that you broke ground in 2015?
Yes. Yep. So.
Right. And then how long did it take you to fully complete that project? And when did you?
2 years.
Yeah, a couple of years.
Yeah,
a couple of years. So like you, one of the things that you said there was time, obviously time, and that can obviously affect your costs and your development finance and all the rest of it. So effectively that took you about 4 years to do that 30 houses. So if you were doing that now with all the experience you've got, what would you be looking at now and completing that sort of?
30 houses should be anything between a year and a year and a half now. We're from a physical, technical capability. We're more than capable of building 30 houses a year.
Building houses is actually the easy part. It's all of the interfaces, the people that you deal with at the front end of it. We've talked about this till long on the face. We've tried to do some things to improve the time it takes to get planning approval, but it just seems to be that it's the one speed that everyone goes at. It typically takes between 18 months to 24 months to get planning approval, unconditional planning approval. And by the time you add building warrants and road construction consents and utilities and infrastructure, you get no change in the 2 years. So to answer your question in that, we can build the houses probably in half the time it took us when we first set up, but we're still losing all that front end time in terms of planning and warrants and
and what were the major challenges on that first one then? Like, I mean, you talked about the planning. Was that one of the main things, or?
Yeah, I mean, I guess as a new, we call it mainstream house builder, rather than, it wasn't that we decided to buy a single plot or a plot for 3 or 4 houses and go and try and achieve planning, or buy one that already had planning in place. We did jump straight into the deep end. It was a site that was a brownfield site. It previously had homes built on that and cleared away many years ago. So there was lots of unknowns in the ground. We had to go through all of the design process. So I guess kind of learning a lot of it as we went, because although we knew majority of things to do with construction, there's certain things that you don't know until you've lived that life. And once you get into the realms of mainstream development, the road construction consent, road bonds, all of the insurances, professional indemnity, your planning, your building warrants, etc. All of those things were certainly far more onerous than we anticipated.
Well, I think the other thing as well, Nick, is that this is a small industry in a lot of ways, and people you're dealing with, you need to build that relationship, whether it's a planning officer, building warrant officer, the road engineer, drainage engineers, your own engineers, your architects. That takes time, and even as you build that trust and that relationship, there's still a process to go through, and there's still checks and balances that need to be taken. And while we're all quite critical of those, those constraints, if you like, on progress, you've also got to put yourself in the shoes of the local authorities who, they've had their headcount decimated over the years, they've had their budgets cut and slashed as well. So, I don't want to be too critical of the local authorities in that respect, because they've got challenges as well as us. But I guess the learning points from all of this is that there's a lot of different people behind the scenes that maybe people who are not immersed in construction, or at least house building in Scotland, probably don't see. And sometimes it's a hard discussion to have with a home buyer. Then you've said, look, we've encountered delays, and yet your house has been delayed a couple of months because of X, Y, and Z. unless you're fully immersed in that and you see all of these variables, these known knowns and unknown knowns, and unknown unknowns, you're not really seeing the full picture. And I guess that's been a very steep learning curve for us, because there's the old saying, if it can go wrong, it will go wrong. We've got Scottish weather to contend with as well, guys. Don't forget that.
But there must be you guys started this in 2013 with a view to, build sustainable, affordable housing. That was your mission, right? Roll on to 2022. We still seem to be in a housing crisis with not enough affordable homes. So what is it that the government are not doing enough of? What could they be doing to make things for, smaller developer builders to get into this industry? Is there a lot of red tape up there? Is there anything obvious?
Well, do you answer from the operational point of view?
Yeah.
I'll answer from the commercial point of view, because there's two aspects to the answer of that.
That's one that we could probably spend the next 6 hours going on. And we obviously have our limited knowledge of that part of the industry and all what goes on. But the reality is that the UK government had said many years ago, I'm probably talking about 5, maybe 10 years ago, that we were short of millions of houses as a country. At the last article that I recall reading, we were sitting at something like a deficit of about 4.5 million new homes that we basically need right this second. Now, as a country, we're not capable of building that amount of homes, obviously, in a period of time. I think the boom days, we were sitting at about maybe 250,000 houses of an output in 1 year.
That's for the whole UK.
And that's for the whole of the UK. Now, the problem is back into the 2008, 2009 crash, we had lots of people in the industry who had their fingers burnt and left the industry, and they haven't come back. Then we went through a period of time where, bigger companies, their ability or willingness to take on apprentices and train new people wasn't being dealt with. Or the main contractors were perhaps trying to pass that burden on to the smaller companies, and therefore it wasn't being dealt with efficiently. The other issue that we have right now is that young people don't really see construction as being a sexy industry to go into. Nowadays, it seems a much sexier option to become an influencer or a YouTuber, and you could probably get rich overnight.
That's what we're trying to do.
Videos. So,
how's that working out,
yeah.
Still look like homeless.
Unfortunately, you need to be, much better looking, slightly cuter, a little sort of cuddly dog or something like that. But for the rest of us in the real world, we're never going to have that talent. And for every, I guess, million people that want that or have that aspiration, there's probably only 1% that will be lucky enough to achieve that. Lots of people have been, I guess, pushed down the line of getting education, which is extremely important, but maybe viewing university and some kind of academic type future as opposed to in the, I'll call it the older days when people of my age were slightly younger, we were encouraged to go out and get a trade. And the theory being was that if you did have other talents, well, at least you had a trade under your belt. So if you became a joiner or a plumber or an electrician, for example, you had a good solid grounding, you had that ability to get a work ethic drummed into you through that sort of 4 or 5 year apprenticeship, for example. And then if you wanted to go on and become an architect later on, well, you had a bit of knowledge of the industry that you'd served some time in. But there's far fewer people who now want to follow that journey. And the unfortunate thing is, given where we are right now as an industry, the opportunities to earn a very, very good living as a tradesperson is probably the highest it's been in certainly as long as I've ever known. So your average joiner and plumber and sparky and decorator, for example, they have the ability to earn a really good wage and provide a really good income to their home. And if they have any kind of entrepreneurial streak through them at all, and a good bit of knowledge of their industry, they'll go on and set up a small, cottage industry type joinery company, for example, and that'll then grow when they employ another couple of joiners to come and work as part of their team.
And before you know it, they're earning some pretty serious money. And, it probably to the extent where the average good quality tradesperson has the opportunity to earn a lot more money than the average person who's going to come out of university with a fair bit of university debt. So I'm not saying that it's the right thing for everyone, that everyone should go into construction, or it's the wrong thing to go into university. It's just, I think that we've went through a period where the willingness or the desire to go into construction has kind of been lost a little bit. And that's certainly something that we're feeling the effects on.
That's really interesting. So a skills shortage in the industry. And, you would think that if anything, with all the talk about bringing properties up to standard for minimum EPC rating C and all the rest of it, they would be investing in trying to bring young people into the industry. You know what I mean? So,
well, I don't think it's as simple as just spending more money. I think the problem is there needs to be more industry engagement. What I mean by that is that, we've had quite a few initiatives by the Scottish government and the UK government trying to get young people into work, but there's some fundamentals at play. First of all, you need to have the motivation to want to work and want to learn. And we've said, especially in the conversation this morning, about the youth of today. And I don't want to be derogatory when I say this, but you've got to have a willingness to learn. I don't mind if someone comes to us and they've got very rudimentary skills in counting, arithmetic, and spelling. That's not necessarily something that's insurmountable. But if they've got a willingness to learn and a willingness to turn up and work on time and work a full working week, you can work with that. You can mold it. You can bring them on, and that's what we want to do. But when you've got people that don't even bother turning up to interviews, when you've got people that don't come in on a Monday, the weekend millionaires, and then you might see them Tuesday if you're lucky, and then you're struggling to get any productivity out of them. Those are what I call almost a lost cause, and they cost the industry millions of pounds every year. It's what I say. It's not a silver bullet. Just going and getting these initiatives to say, well, we had Kickstart. We use Kickstart as a way to try and bring young people in that were maybe struggling to get their first job. And I know it's very hard when you come out of school or uni and you've not got any experience under your belt. You need that experience for your first job. We've had an open door policy for that, and we've tried to encourage people in. But a lot of candidates either don't show up, or when they do, they make 2 or 3 weeks and that's it. Oh, I don't like working in the cold. Scottish winters are horrible. I think I'll get a job working on checkout or pushing trolleys. Whatever the reason, you've got to have that fundamental willingness to want to learn and to turn up for work.
I think the other one as well, though, is that we kind of live now in a world of entitlement, if I can put it that way, or instant success. So people want to go to their mobile phone and they want a pizza, they'll order that.
They want that instant gratification.
That's right. And that kind of translates slightly, I think, into to people coming on board. When we all started out in the industry, we start out at the bottom, you have the sweet floors, unfortunately we still sweet floors, it seems to be every day. But you go through that process of learning, and it's not just about turning up on day one and by the end of week one when you're now a joiner. You have to go through all the processes of learning how to become a joiner, or learning how to become an electrician, or if you want to go into site management, for example, it may take 2 or 3 years to get the experience and knowledge and understanding of the processes and all the documentation that has to be done, etc. So that can't be learned overnight. But if you have people that come into the industry and by the end of the first week or on week 2, they're coming and saying, listen, I think it's unfair that I'm being paid less than Mr. Smith that I'm working alongside. But the reality is Mr. Smith has been in the industry for 25 years. So not only is he a fully qualified tradesperson, but after he's become qualified, he's then went and worked for another 20 years to become a very experienced joiner. And it's that kind of scenario where you wouldn't have a junior doctor carrying out surgery in week 5 of their postgrad. Yeah, I mean, they're probably going to do 7 years to become a doctor once they've got the qualifications, and then the next 20 or 30 years before they're becoming the type of person that you're quite happy to allow them to do brain surgery. But we don't have that in our industry. People want to be the brain surgeon from the end of week 1, and they find it very unfair that the brain surgeon's being paid twice what they are.
And so, we've both lived this. I mean, we're talking from experience. I mean, when I came out of uni after doing a chemical engineering degree, I spent the first 2 years working in the food plant as an operator. So, there's an element of humility that's involved with that. And I think, getting that hands-on experience at the early stages of a career is very important, and not having that elitist attitude that often do for this. That's what's needed, is to get that that experience at the ground floor and work your way up. I'm just going to change tack a little bit here. Nick, you'd asked us what are some of the other options, and I said that it was a multifaceted problem in terms of building houses. I think from a commercial or finance point of view, one of the other things that the government could do a lot more with, it's certainly something I've brought up at SPF meetings I've been to and other forums, is that, from an SME house builder point of view, we contribute a lot to the economy, not just in terms of jobs, but what we offer our local communities as opposed to sort of national house builders. And it's a very tough scenario, particularly for a new company, but even established companies getting finance. And what I mean by that is that 2008, 2009, we had the crash. There was a lack of willingness on the high street banks and even some of the challenger banks to lend money for development, and that has kind of persisted. It's a lot harder now to get finance for companies that are looking to do 10, 20, 30 house developments, and that comes with a lot of red tape and fish hooks with it. And I think in the past we've spoken to industry people about freeing up the ability to get lower interest rates for SME house builders, and that where you're not going through maybe the high street banks. And there's certainly examples of that in England, where Homes England provide favourable or more competitive interest rates and development finance for SME house builders, particularly if they're going down a sustainable route for house building, or they've got EPC ratings of B or A, or they've going towards net zero. So I think it's a very positive thing they're doing in England, and I'd like to see that done more in Scotland. I think it would be a major help. The other thing that's interesting as well is that, again, the unsexy side of it is that when you're doing developments of more than 5 houses, if you've got any roads to build, those roads have to be adopted. Now, what all the local authorities impose on developers is as a road bond. Usually you can't get these as an insurance policy anymore because what happened at the end of 2009. So typically, developers have to fund these massive big cash bonds to councils, which they don't see anything back until 2 or 3 years after the development's finished. And that comes out of your cash flow. So these are quite, they sound quite procedural, but they have a massive impact on the ability of SME house builders to actually fund and develop out a large site. And as you'll appreciate, the bigger your development to a certain extent, the more economies of scale you get. So if you're doing a whole lot of 5 house developments just to stand at the threshold for having to put in road bonds and having a road construction consent, you're not making much of a dent in the housing crisis, and it's a very inefficient way of building houses. If you can get out site for, I would say, a minimum of 30 houses, there starts to become some economies of scale. But therein lies the problem, is that you've now got to post these huge road construction bonds that go into councils, and they sit on them for 2, 3, 4 years, and you're not being able to do anything with that money. And that's a bit of a strangle on, I think, new SME house builders building up more houses.
Can I take you back to the beginning a little bit? Because I think that a lot of the listeners that are maybe flipping properties, built up a buy-and-let portfolio, doing other property strategies, would take a lot of value on taking it back to the start. Because the first site you got was 30 houses. Could you talk us through a little bit through how it was sourced and how the funding was raised to kind of carry out that development? And were you guys working full time at the same time to kind of provide your income, or did you take the income straight to the business?
Well, we were both working when we set the company up. So I was still working in my role, and I think we were doing a lot of the setting up of this company and all the feasibility studies, if you like, in our own spare time. I won't go too much into detail of the commercial aspects of it, but we had to take a very innovative approach to how we funded it for the reasons I outlined before. And I think it's fair to say that there's been a bit of negotiation with council about land purchase price, in terms of, we offered them probably a bit more money, but in order to defer the purchase of the site until we had planning permission, for example. So, when you're starting out, having to shell out all the money for the land purchase is quite a big cost. And then you're probably looking at up to 2 years for the planning and then the building warrants to come through. So that money that's been expended is not actually doing much other than securing the land that you're building on. So
did you take an option out on the land then, and
yes,
the terms to pay the council at the back end?
Yeah, that's right. So they got a bit of a, I guess, pro quo at the end of it, they get a bit more uplift at the end of it, but it's deferred. So that's
sorry, but it's not that we paid the land on completion of the houses. All we did was, agreed that the land, we agreed the land value, but the payment for the land didn't have to be made until after the planning permission was. The council still get their land value prior to the development going ahead. I just think it's important just to clarify that, in case anyone thinks that councils are going to give them land upfront for free.
And that initial outlay of getting the planning permission, I'm assuming that's a large cost up front. Did you guys absorb that cost with your own funds?
Yeah, so
I mean, that's why we're used to the millionaires. I mean, now.
I started out as a billionaire, fell out of millionaire status, and this will never stint. It's a bit like buying a football club, isn't it? You should never do it. But yes, it is expensive to step into this world, and I think if based on the chart I had, obviously for the property network event, there's a lot of people at that event have a lot of portfolio of buy-to-let properties, or maybe buying properties at auctions and flipping them once they've refurbished them and whatnot. That's a really good way, I think, for people to get a good grounding in the industry, particularly if you're buying properties and fixing them up, because you'll all then have a little bit of experience of dealing with tradespeople of all different sort of natures, dealing with the suppliers over the past few years, understanding the ups and downs in the supply chain, the volatility that comes with all of that. So that's a real good way of getting a bit of a grounding in the industry. The buy-to-let side of things, if you've got a lot of portfolio of, let's say 5 or 10, or in some people's cases, a few more than that, houses, maybe that'll give them a little bit of equity to try and help support the funding and the borrowings that they need to look at buying a plot of land. Now, I personally think that should anyone do what we did, probably not. Definitely need a heads check. I think we were lucky that Mike and I, we're the type of people that realised that to do what we've done right now, we've worked harder than we ever have our entire lives, and we continue to do that. So if you want some kind of passive way of earning an income and getting rich overnight, don't do this. Find something else, put all your money in Bitcoin or buy lottery tickets or something. It's probably slightly more guaranteed. But the reality is that to make it work, we're talking a quiet week. If you're putting 70 hours in, you're probably spending a bit of time with your feet up and smoking cigars. It's that's a very quiet week. In the early days of Invertay, we bought that first site. There was many a time we were working right through the night, all through the following day, and through the next night with no sleep at all. We were getting close to handover dates where we committed to people that they would have their house on a particular date, and they were linked in with the way they were funding the house and help to buy, etc. So no matter what, we had to have that house finished. Now that meant that we worked 36, 38 hours straight, went home and managed to get 3 or 4 hours sleep, and came back to site and started all over again. That's exactly what we did.
And when you say working, what exactly were you doing when, and those days, were you physically hands-on tools, finishing bits and pieces off and all the rest of it?
Absolutely, and we still are every single day. And this is the part that I was trying to get through to people at the property event is, doing what we do is not a hands-off lifestyle. If you want to be successful at it, if you want it to work, it has to be hands-on. And when I say hands-on is, Mike and I are both qualified to jump into the site telehandler forklifts. If the telehandler doesn't turn up that day, we almost kind of draw straws and say, who's going to go and cover that at the site? And one of us will jump into the telehandler. If the digger driver doesn't turn up, we're in the digger. If concrete's come at the site to do a foundation, but the truck's turned up 2 hours later than anticipated and it has to be in that day, we'll have our wellies on and we're in the concrete. There's not a single thing in our business that we don't do and haven't done, and this is on a daily and weekly basis to keep everything going, but also so that the boys and girls that are part of our team know that everyone's equal in our organisation. There's no one that's above
picking up a sweeping brush.
That's real life, you know. That's what, you know, people don't understand, you know. This, they might see the success of you and these big projects that you've got on the go, but they don't see the, you know, in behind the scenes what you're putting in. And
yeah, they probably just assume that, you know, we're making oodles amount of money. We've got all of these schemes on the go. We've constantly got crane days and completions posted up on LinkedIn and things like that. So therefore, you know, we must be spending all our time in our holiday homes over in the Bahamas. And
this is the reason why we started the podcast as well, was to show people that it's not the bullshit that people put online and the success stories and they get rich quick with building a property portfolio, flipping properties, or building new builds. It's always going to be the pain points. It's hard work. It's shitload of hours. It's a lot of sacrifice in your personal life to get where you need to be, and still are doing it. It's not like you put the feet up after a couple of sites and go, all right, that's as we've done a couple of houses now, right, we can put our feet up, and a lot of people run it. It's a continuation of your business and growing your brand, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, most people want to go into property because they want to make money, and they see this as a way of making money. And I guess if I'm being brutally honest about it, it's a very easy way of making money. What you got to do is work harder and work longer hours. And, you know, it's no different from anyone else in their day job. If you are, you know, the person who stacks shelves in a supermarket, or you work in a petrol station, or you're a solicitor, or it doesn't matter what you are, if you want to earn more money, and you're happy enough to work an extra 10 hours that week, you're going to earn a bit more money. And, you know, we always say to the people that work alongside us, or our boys and girls, is that, you know, if they want a little bit more out of life, all they've got to do is learn how to manage their money a bit more effectively, and not be, you know, we always joke the weekend millionaires, where they're paid on a Friday and, you know, the weekend everyone's on it, and come on Monday morning they're all skint, and they don't turn up for work.
So not only your kind of the hard working that we always put in, but it's also the risk factor. Now, that first site you building 30 houses, I'm assuming you're all in with your own funds, your own work, you've got the bank lending on top of it.
Every
and
day.
at what point was, I mean, surely there must have been panic setting in at some stages where you're going, shit, have we got our numbers right, Mike? Have we got our numbers right, Eddie? Are we going to actually make the money? And at what stage does house 20, 21, 22 sell actually break even? And to get to that point, is that not a panic and a worry the whole thing?
I think there's a couple of parts to that. I mean, you know, you're right. There was a lot of things that would probably put people off, you know, from the risk point of view, having that hanging over your head all the time. But I've always been a firm believer that there's a lot of things you have control of your own destiny in some aspects. And it's ironic that a lot of those, you know, moments where we've got Pratt, you know, this is something we didn't anticipate a budget for. Those are generally things that we have certain control over. You know, the things we're dealing with third parties, like particularly utility companies, you know, you're just a number for them, and they're not interested about, you know, someone's handover date, the fact that they're going to be homeless if you can't complete that date. You know, you can't get completion certificates on your electrical safety certificates and gas certificates and all the rest of it. So there's a lot of preamble that comes into getting to a point where you can apply for a habitation certificate on a house. And those are all almost outside your control. Then you've got the things, as you said before, about ground conditions. I mean, we took a big punt with that site because, you know, it was a brownfield site, had a whole lot of scan blocks on it. We knew that there'd have been, you know, foundation footings that were probably still buried in there. Hopefully they're not the place where we're going to be putting someone's new house foundation. And luckily we didn't strike anything. But, you know, these are the kind of black swan events that when they come along, they really do, you know, make you start to worry about, you know, how you're going to make it all work. But I think you've got to look at it in the greater context. There's a lot of things that could go wrong with it. And as Eddie said, you know, you put a lot of time, blood, sweat, and tears into these things to try and manage or mitigate all of those risks from eventuating. And yeah, you can do a lot to mitigate them. You can't completely eliminate them, but there's always that saying between what is actual risk and what's perceived risk. And I think that's where there's a difference between people that are entrepreneurs who want to take risks, is how they perceive that risk versus how other people perceive it. Some people in my family think I'm bloody nuts, you know, why would you do that? You put yourself at huge exposure and you could lose everything. But, you know, if people all thought like that, then nothing would ever happen, nothing would change. So, you know, there's people that are willing to take risks and there's people that are not, and that's just the way of the world.
It's calculated risks. As Mike says, you know, you plan for every eventuality, and then you build up a
a risk register around all the different things that could potentially go wrong, and you try and predict that, and you try and come
Is
up
that
with-
what that was called? Risk register. I thought we just used that for dart practice.
Like we'd mentioned about obviously the big C word there at the start and COVID, and obviously you guys started out in 2013. Things were a little bit tricky with lending, but then we saw, like, say, 5 years where things in the economy were just going along quite smoothly. We were getting a decent growth in the housing market and all the rest of it, right? Then what happened?
It's all lies. It's all lies. We were speaking to someone about this earlier, Nick, and there is that perception, and I think it's the sort of the blinkers on version of after the COVID pandemic, if we can say we're post-COVID now, that everything was rosy before COVID happened. It wasn't. It was even bloody close. And we were talking about this with a lending institute a wee while ago, saying, how would you manage costs increases, because it's been such big cost increases over the last 2 years. And said, 2 years, try 5 years. We've had huge shortages of materials before COVID came along. And I guess you could say that it's allowed us to cut our teeth on, mini panics around supply chain issues and what have you. But they're all real issues that have been there before COVID. COVID's just made them a lot more, obvious to the general public. But we went through 2018, 2019. There was huge shortages of plasterboard. You couldn't really get the stuff. Insulation was another one. And because you couldn't get it, the price went up, and it went up drastically. Now, when you consider what a new modern day home is constituents are, is a plasterboard, insulation and timber, probably the three biggest materials that go into it apart from concrete. So, we've weathered a lot of storms before we got near COVID. I'm not going to say COVID was a walk in the park, but I think we had already developed the mechanisms to cope with those cost shocks. And I think we also had a very, very good relationship with our trusted supply chain about how to manage those risks. And I think the key thing is when when the shit hits the fan, the first thing to do is take stock of how bad the spread is, and then work out how you're going to deal with it. And once you're armed with the facts, you can start planning and controlling what you can control. And I think we've done a very good job of that over the last 2 years, or 4 years.
I think the good thing is Mike and I have always been quite good at coming up with a plan B or a plan C. We've always had a bit of a buffer on everything that we've planned for. But as Mike said, there's no one can sort of plan or program in every single factor. The houses aren't built by robots; they're built by human beings that have, the weather to contend with. We've got external supply chain, all of these factors that are completely out of our control. So the trick is to plan as much as you possibly can, but have enough knowledge, experience, and I guess relationships with different suppliers, etc. That when things go wrong that weren't anticipated, COVID coming along, for example, is that we're very quick to be able to adapt and come up with ways of being able to deal with that. And the sooner you know about that incident taking place, the sooner you can come up with a plan B. And that could be anything from COVID, but all the way right back to the site level. We say all the boys and girls on the site all the time, if something goes wrong, they have to have the integrity to stick their hand up and say, listen, this went wrong, or we've broken this, or the digger drove over something because they didn't realise it was lying there, or things like that. But the sooner we know about it, the sooner we can fix it and come up with plan B. Whereas if you don't know about it and you get to that stage where you're about to hand a house over to someone, you genuinely believe that the house is in perfect condition, the guys have been in, they've done all the snagging, and then when you're doing the walk around on handover, there's a big mark down the wall because at the last minute someone's went in to go and just tweak a final little thing that was on their snagging list to have that house perfect, ready for the client coming at 3 o'clock for their keys. And when you walk into the house with a client, there's a big score down the wall. It's not the nicest situation to be in. So trying to educate everyone right through the whole process that things go wrong. It's real life. Everything goes wrong on a building site, probably 100 times a day, every single day of our working life. It's just finding a way to efficiently deal with all those mistakes, those errors, those accidents, those damages, and just accommodate that into the overall process. And I think that's something that we're relatively good at.
I'm glad to hear that's on new builds as well, because I always when you hear people talking about there's a square meterage of a new build development, I always thought it was because things didn't go as wrong, because you didn't know what was behind the wall, you didn't know what was in the foundation, you didn't know if there's any damp or rot or stuff going. But it's good to hear that if still shit goes wrong on new build sites as well.
Yeah, of course. I mean, as Mike says, if you're buying a brownfield site like what we do, you can go and do all of the site investigation, but there's only so many times you can do test bores and analyze all the soils, etc., etc. But the reality is, until you physically dig all of the foundation trenches for every single house and everything else that's to go into the development, such as digging out the road box for the roads and the footpaths being created, you've got no idea what's in that ground. You can only take your best and well-educated estimates of what's in there and add a little bit of contingency for all the unforeseens that come along. Where going back to this first development, actually, we had all of the drawings through from the utility companies for the gas, the water, the electric, etc. We were able to track all the chartered electricity services, etc. And whilst we were digging one of the houses and when we were forming the roads, we found this huge big spaghetti junction of electric cables that did look old, but we phoned the electricity company and said, we found all these cables, they're not on any of the charts. The SSE came out the site, they had a look and said, oh no, they'll all be dead. That's all from the old scan blocks, the big concrete
just
blocks.
Just put your digger back up.
Yeah. You'll be okay to dig that out. And we said to them, well, how about you cut it with a hacksaw first to prove that it's dead? Because we were getting a reading off it on our sensors. And he said, no, it's definitely dead. And he said, no, we'll do the lick test. Yeah. Well, you cut it and then we'll dig it out. And he said, right, okay, fine. I'll get someone to come and check it. And he got the engineers to come along and they put the SSE, put their test meters on it. And one of them was a proper live LV cable.
Oh, it was better than that. And he said to us, it's definitely dead. The guy says, no, it's not. It's hanging out. It's smoking.
Yeah, there was smoke coming out at one point.
There was smoke coming off it.
So it just shows you, and that then involved quite a lot of delay while all those cables were having to be diverted and moved. And that was because, the utility companies didn't even know that those cables existed. So, going back to the overall development, you can only put your best foot forward. You plan everything that you're aware of to infinity. You have a little bit of contingency and all the different things that can go wrong. And I guess, having the experience that we have, not only as Invertay, but prior to us forming Invertay, decades of experience in this industry, knowing all of the things that can probably go wrong. And sometimes that's down to, allowing for uncharted cables. Other times it's down to having the realistic understanding that you have to make allowances for human beings, because more often than not, when we're let down, it usually involves a human being at some point in the process. So accommodating for that, and if the numbers all still stack up once we've done all of that diligence, then there's almost like something wrong. But it means that yes, that's a viable development. And I think for some of the listeners who are tuning into this that may be interested in moving forward on buying a bit of land and building a house, it can be the most amazing experience. The excitement of building something and be able to stand back and look at it and say, I created that is fantastic. But it can also be the most sort of horrific experience of anything that they've ever done. And, unfortunately, some people are just not cut out for it. I think you need to have a bit of a thick skin. You need to realize that, if there's something that goes wrong and you've got no control over it, well, the reality is if there's nothing you can do about it, do nothing. There's no point in panicking over it. You just need to find the plan B, the plan C, and sometimes the plan X, Y, and Z on certain parts.
What advice would you give the guy starting out that would want to look into becoming a house builder? Would you advise a certain size, a site you would start with, or what would be the kind of outline plan?
If they've never done, obviously I'll give my opinion on this first, but if they've never built a house before, if they've done some refurbishments and things like that, they'll have a little bit of knowledge. Start out small, try and buy, maybe a 1, 2, even up to a 5-house plot where they're not getting involved in some of the other elements that come along once you go beyond that, and try and get 2 or 3 under the belt, hopefully make themselves a little bit of money, so that gives them a little bit of redundancy in their future ventures. In an ideal world, either partner up with, joint venture with, or get mentoring from someone who's been there and done it. If there's someone who's worked for another house builder building houses for the last 20 years and they're going to go alone, they're going to have a lot more knowledge than your average individual tradesperson who's not done any of it. And if they can get someone behind them, for that moral support, someone they can bounce off of, and if that might come at a cost, of course, because all advisors, whether it's your architect, your engineers, etc., everyone comes at a cost, but that will pay huge dividends to their project. And if they can get that scenario where they're able to look at the entire process from start to finish as efficiently as possible, because it doesn't matter what way you look at it, time costs money, and every day that they're on site, they're burning through money. So time and efficiency is probably a couple of big things.
Yeah, I don't think it's sort of faint-hearted. I think if you need to have a little bit of resilience in it, because nothing will go perfectly right the first time or the second or the third time. There's always something that comes back to bite you. But I think one thing I would share is that don't be afraid to question professionals. All the way through this, you've got to remember professionals are paid on the hour. They might agree to a lump sum for doing a package of work, but they don't have any skin in the game, nothing at all. So they can give you the best advice, but at the end of the day, it's just advice. It's you that's going to pay the bill if they cock it up. It's going to be you that pays the bill if it goes well. But never be afraid to question expert advice. I hate using the word expert, but yeah, there's that nugget of information, because we've had quite a few arguments with professionals that are on our team, but I think it's important to have that healthy debate with someone who doesn't have skin in the game. Yes, they can be objective about things because they don't have that emotional attachment. It's not their house that's on the line if it all goes pear-shaped. But I don't think you should be afraid to challenge that professional advice you get. You're paying for it, you might as well bloody ask. The other one is, I think you have to make sure that you can live within your means. And what I mean by that is that, you need to have the funding there, but don't be too stretched with it. You need to have contingency in your budget. And you also want to be very careful about how you value the end product, because at the end of this, you need to be making profit. You need to have a bit of contingency in there, but you don't want to be paying too much for the land where, you can only put a house of a certain value on it, and that's your ceiling. And if you end up spending far too much building the house, you'll never realize that value. So you've got to be quite regimental with your budget and about how you spend money. And I think sometimes we've been quite fortunate that we can take a step back when things have gone a bit pear-shaped and say, well, okay, this isn't going to plan. We're going to be over budget if we carry on down this route. What's a different way that we can come up with the same or similar solution that's not going to end up busting the budget? Never be afraid to go back and reassess what was in the original plan, because quite often, what's the old saying in the army? No good plan survives first contact with the enemy, and it's pretty much the same on a building site. No plan survives first contact with the bloody ground when you start digging. So don't be afraid to reassess and change. If things don't work out, then just change. You have to.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got to be fluid. And one of the other things as well is that never ever. We spoke earlier about our houses being genuinely affordable, but although they're genuinely affordable, they're not cheap. By that, what I mean is all of the fixtures and fittings that we use in our houses tend to be far more expensive than what goes into the average new build. So just to put that in context, we can buy a tap that has all the certification, ticks all light boxes, and put that into our bathrooms that might cost us £15, for example, which the biggest majority of mainstream house builders use those kind of taps. Whereas the taps that we use cost about £50 or £60. And the reason why we do that is because that tap, instead of coming with only a 2-year guarantee, comes with a 15-year guarantee. And the reliability of that tap might seem like a really inconsequential thing, but when you have the responsibility of that house during its construction, that house during its handover, and the responsibility to a certain extent of that house after the homeowners moved into there, that sort of £15 versus a 56 or £58 tap is invaluable.
That's only one visit from a plumber to replace it.
Yeah.
So
And we apply that to all different kinds of things. So, for example, internal door sets. Mike and I import door sets directly from Germany. We have the distribution rights to cover the country for those door sets, which we use it in our houses as standard, and we offer them out to other developers as well. Now, the good thing about those door sets is, one, the quality. They're completely pre-finished in the factory. The quality of the door sets versus your average UK door set is night and day. The installation time is about a quarter of the installation of a UK door set, and you don't need decorators to come behind you to fill all the holes where they've been screwed into place and decorate and paint all the facings and things like that. Everything is completely pre-finished. So whilst that door set maybe costs us £100, £150 more than a UK door set, overall the cost to us actually works out cheaper. And coming back to the time and the speed of installation. So we look at all the different elements that we put into the house, and yes, cost of everything is important, but it's not the critical factor. The critical factor is, how long is it going to take? How reliable is that supply chain? So, for example, we did from a company once order 8 houses worth of UK door sets. We were told between 6 and 8 weeks from order. By week 12, we still didn't have all of them on site because they were arriving in drips and drabs because they were falling behind. And what we were getting quality-wise was firewood at best. Whereas, importing the doors from Germany, it does seem a bit extreme when there is suppliers in the UK of door sets, but they can't match the quality, the reliability. When we order them from Germany through our system, when the Germans say that the doors will arrive at our factory in Dundee on a given date, the doors arrive at our factory in Dundee on a given date. Brexit had no effect at all, not one single bit, on importing doors into the country. So all of the stories about the Brexit and things like that is being overinflated to allow price increases to come along. There is some minor changes. Maybe cost us about 80 quid per load extra for freight forwarding companies and things like that. But again, if you deal with the process in-house, you deal with it smart and efficient, then you can iron out all of the headaches that we're being told is in the industry. And that's one of the key things. It's just cheapest isn't always best.
That's good. It's good lessons. Really good advice. Just cautious of time, guys. Want to kind of wrap up because you've been really great. Can you give us a little bit of your sense of achievement over the last 6 years as a business? How many homes have you built as Invertay? What's the focus on now? Is it still doing what you're doing? Are you pivoting at all in the business? I think I read somewhere you're doing maybe some build to rent projects as well.
We're progressing towards that. Yes, so we've set up a separate company for the build to rent. Again, it's something that we see as being a good opportunity for, not so much an opportunity for us, more so flexibility for our clients. The issue right now is that everyone's gone through a bit of a roller coaster ride, and what we are seeing, and we will continue to see as interest rates rise over the next couple of years, is that it will become harder for people to access the funding to buy a house. And regardless of how much we manage that process and make the house as genuinely affordable as possible, ultimately someone still has to be able to get the deposit together to get a mortgage, and they have to be approved for a mortgage. If we could be saying to our customers who are queuing up to buy one of our houses, yes, you can have one of the houses, but how would you like it? Would you like to buy the house? Would you like to rent it long term? Or would you like to rent it with the option to buy in 2 years or 5 years time, so that you're not missing out having that house and having to go and buy someone else's when we were your first choice? That's why we think build to rent is quite a good opportunity. We think that as time goes on, the ability for people to continue buying houses is definitely getting harder, and that will only become worse the more onerous it is to build houses. So, for example, we're we're all being pushed towards the carbon net zero, increase in energy performance, which doesn't really affect us because we're already at a very, very high level. Renewables, we already put PV as standard on the roofs. We're looking to introduce electric car charging points as standard on our houses. So we're trying to future-proof the houses, but trying to make sure that it's accessible as possible for the clients. So that's kind of the
where do you guys stand on the heat pump debate? We need to say this before we go. So heat pumps or no heat pumps, gas boilers?
Yeah. No, signals going.
No, you never gave us the amount of homes you've built over since you started Invertay Homes.
Very roughly, because we've done some grand design houses, we've done some affordable housing, plus we've done our own developments. I think we're probably well over 100, 120 there or thereabouts.
Yeah, we've got this pre-development.
Yeah.
The stuff we did at Angus Housing Association
Yeah.
and a few other large grand design houses. So
Yeah.
I think it's 105, 106 over that time period.
Right,
Yeah.
guys.
And then we've got quite a few that are in the next few weeks that are ready to be handed over. Yeah, so I mean, right now we've kind of slowly, organically grown up to the stage where we're capable of building 25 to 30 houses per annum now. The previous aim was by 2022, 2023 to be up at 50, but obviously COVID's put a big dent in that. But concurrently to the developments, Mike and I also have a factory where we do the off-site manufacturing for timber kits, etc. So there has been a bit of focus on the development and the growth of that business as well. So realistically, could we build 50 houses a year within the next year or two? Yes, from a technical point of view, but there's lots of other ducks to line up for that to happen.
Mainly labour, I think.
Yeah.
Labour and land, I think, are the two issues that sort of are bothering at the moment. But yeah, we're working on those. We've changed how we build the houses a lot in the last 12 months as a result of labour shortages. It's not a case that we can't carry on building, it's just we have to change the way we do it. And that's what's instigated this whole MMC that we're doing at the moment through a factory, the modern methods of construction. So we're doing a lot more off-site manufacturing than we did maybe 2 years ago. There's a huge scope for us to increase that as well, to doing a lot more off-site manufacturing. That's to try and offset the amount of labour resource that we can get onto the sites. I think it's much easier to resource the labour in a factory than it is on-site construction. Lots of different reasons for that, which I don't think we have time to go into.
Yeah.
I think one final thing, just as you say, we are conscious of time now, but for other people kind of looking to move into this, we've pretty much got a doors open policy.
Well, as long as they bring chocolate biscuits.
Chocolate biscuits is going. No chocolate biscuits don't pass the front end.
What's your favourite chocolate biscuit?
We'll send you the list. We've got your email address.
A blue ribbon, I think. It has to be a blue ribbon.
Yeah.
But no, if people want to come in, any of your listeners want to come and have a conversation over, our developments, the timber frame kits, we could easily accommodate. We already partner up in supplying down south now in the Yorkshire area some timber frame kits with several businesses down there. So we can help out with timber frame kits. We can help out with German door sets. We can help out with kitchens, and possibly, because we've got so much spare time, we may even be able to help out a little bit in terms of guidance and mentoring and things like that. But in reality, if anyone, including yourselves, of course, want to come along and spend a day with us and see what the mad world of Eddie and Mike involves, you need to bring a suit, shirt and tie, work clothes, hard hat, boots, and anything else in between, because usually it's in here first thing in the morning, doing a bit of admin work, out on the site, bit of madness on site, back to the office, and usually if we're really lucky, we're walking out the door by 9 or 10 p.m, just in time before the dinner goes in the dog.
Listen, I can bring the chocolate biscuits, but I don't know about the suit. I need to draw a line somewhere. But listen, guys, that was really generous of you. You've been great with your time. Some fantastic tips there, and obviously reaching out to listeners there and saying that you'd welcome anybody in. That's just magic. We try to build a community here to help people as well. So it sounds like you guys have got similar kind of ethics to ourselves. So thanks very much for that.
No, you're welcome. Thanks for having us on, and thanks for popping our podcast cherry. We're going to have a glass of champagne tonight to celebrate.
Cheers, guys.
So great chat there. Eddie's kindly invited us up to their factory where they build out the timber kits and all that as well. So myself and Stephen are going to take him up on that offer. Stephen's going to take the hard hat. I'll take the chocolate biscuits. And we'll head up there and do some wee videos for the community as well and show them what goes on behind the scenes there.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to that day up there. Very, very genuinely nice offer as well. And I'm sure we'll look forward to that.
Great. As always, guys, get across to the Scottish Property Podcast Facebook group. Also, if you've got time, please leave us a review and get along to one of our monthly networking meetings, the first Monday of every month. Aberdeen, Dundee, Edinburgh and Glasgow. Stephen?
Yeah, check out Eventbrite and you'll be able to see this month's speakers are all lined up in place, guys. Tickets are £20 and we'll see you there.
Cheers. Bye for now.